Hello, you are listening to the Divorce University online podcast with your hosts, Thomas and Tammy Ferreira.
Hi, I'm Tammy.
And I'm Thomas.
And we are back. And today we are talking about why your children must be in therapy.
And why you should be too.
Why
and your dog.
Why we should all be in therapy.
Everybody in the family, we're all crazy.
The idea for this episode came out of an article I recently read. It's a little bit older article. It's from September 19th, 2019, and it was printed in Psychology Today, and it's by a psychiatrist named Christine Adams, who practices in Louisville, Kentucky. Louisville, my home state. And so, yes, it's my home state because I know how to say Louisville. I'm still trying to teach Thomas. He's a slow learner, though. All right. So.
Wow.
Sorry.
You're the one that's from Kentucky.
It was a joke. Yeah. Well, you're the one that doesn't know how to say Louisville, not me. All right. So one of the things that she starts out with in this article is she talks about the concept of fairness and how, it's one of the things for judicial officers is that, they're concerned with fairness. And this is something that we talked about a few episodes ago on Best Interest of the Child, where it's like, if there's no concern about health, safety, and welfare, then pretty much we're looking at a joint custody situation right. that resembles, a 50-50.
And that's largely because of our statutory scheme in California.
Right, yeah. Right. But most states, I think, have similar types of you have some states actually that are still favor mom like they used to back in the day, but majority of states have trended towards this 50-50 custody situation. So it's kind of interesting because she talks through a few different things, and we're going to kind of build on this as we go through the episode, and you'll find out at the end why your children must be in therapy. You'll have a better understanding. But one of the things that she talks about straight off is how it's frequent that the children are in a situation where they're having to meet the emotional needs of one of the parents, but not the other. And how one parent is kind of that stable parent and the other parent is the one that, is expecting the child to meet their needs. And so the children become very much a people pleaser with that particular parent that they're trying to meet their needs. And she kind of, she didn't quote a specific study or anything, but she kind of talked about how, she worked with children that grew up in these types of environments, that what happens is the children start to feel overwhelmed and stressed and anxious and all of those things. And they worry about their little day-to-day things with the parent that is less emotionally stable. So they're worrying about, am I going to have money for lunch? Right. Is my ball uniform going to be clean? Whatever it is.
Yeah. And I always feel the need to push back when this is asserted. Honestly, ideally, the best situation for the kids is to have two healthy parents.
Correct.
Where neither one is parentified. And the research that I've read mostly talks about how when children have access to their parents in a way that parent is shouldering all the responsibilities of parenting, not just the fun stuff. Fun stuff is good. It builds relationship. But there's also the helping with homework and the teaching of values and that kind of thing. And if you have parents that are both being parents,
right,
then I think that a lot of these concerns are not going to manifest themselves. I think what Ms. Anderson may be dealing with.
Adams.
Adams family, yeah.
Yes. Not the Anderson family.
Yes. They're creepy and they're kooky. How's that go?
Anyway, one of the things she may be dealing with.
Yeah, is a situation where one of the parents is not as emotionally healthy as the other.
Well, but let's face it, that's a lot of what we see in divorcing couples.
Yeah.
And we frequently see that. It's like you'll be on the phone with the other attorney and it's like, Okay, who's got the crazy one, me or you? I mean, you don't literally say that because you can't, but it's sort of implied in the conversations a lot, like who has the more difficult person.
Right, and I think that's why you need coaching, though, because in a lot of situations, you have to discourage the parent from relying on the kid.
Right.
For example, at transition, saying, "Oh, I'm just going to miss you," and coming unglued and kind of putting that responsibility. I think that ideally, the best situation of all is to have some very strong boundaries between the households, with all of the children's needs being met on each side.
Right.
And not everybody can do that. I
Right.
understand
Right.
that. But if you have ball uniforms, if they can't go back and forth, then maybe there should be one in each home. Maybe the homes should be in closer proximity so that the transition is not such a jolt.
Right.
And my final comment about that is I really love alternating weeks. Alternating weeks is my favorite parenting plan. Why is that? Because it gives the child to be able to get into the rhythm of your home and spend some time there. Like if they have the weekend before school starts to just get in the rhythm of everything.
Right.
And it also it means that they're not just visiting that parent. They're going over there and they're home.
Right. Well, and that's the interesting thing about, she does acknowledge that a lot of times there is one parent that the child struggles with more, and the child will feel more like a child and more stable in the other parent's home. But she goes on to say that a large part of it for the kids is just the sheer shifting back and forth.
Yeah.
And so, she makes the argument that, a one parent, home can create some stability and she does say that the child needs to see the other parent frequently and should visit frequently. But to me, that tumultuous shifting back and forth is something that frequently, especially in the coaching, that comes up, because a lot of times I have parents that are saying, well, I don't want to be away from the kid for that long. And it's like, okay, but there's trade-offs to that for your child. Like, what are they going through? And so I think that's one of the arguments for a week on, week off, or as your children got older, we went to 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. Now we're at 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off. They're 17 and 18 though. But I think what that does is,
and sometimes they come back and they don't even recognize you.
or we don't recognize them when they were little, that would happen. But I think that one of the things that does is when you do have another household that you feel is less stable than yours, it creates a situation where the kids have long enough to come in, decompress, and actually have some stability before they're shifted back into that other world.
Yeah.
And I think that a situation like a 2-2-3 or whatever, which we do see in younger kids a lot of times because they need that frequent and continuing contact, but the trade-off is they're feeling shifted all the time.
Yeah, and I'm not a huge fan, really.
Yeah, parents tend to get very emotional when your family's breaking up, right? This is already difficult, and then when we start talking about being away from the child, that's usually a very difficult thing for parents to swallow. But honestly, one of the things that I wanted to point out in this article is just that, sometimes you got to just think about what's best for your kid. Your kid didn't ask for this divorce. They didn't ask for this situation. They didn't ask for 2 households. And I know maybe you didn't either. It was your spouse. But in line to that, how do we create the most stability possible for the child?
And I don't think fairness should be a consideration. And fairness is something that the family law just doesn't take into account.
Right.
Basically, in family law, you've got a statutory scheme that you have to follow, and the court's mandate is to implement that scheme.
Right.
It's not to divvy things up equally.
Right.
But California law, at least, recognizes that the children have a need for connection with both parents.
Right.
And they get some of their identity. A lot of times middle schoolers, they're going through that kind of building of who they are as a person, who
Yep.
they are as a young man or young lady. And that, I think that helps to have two healthy parents have a female role model and a male role model.
Right. Right. If you're lucky enough to have that. I mean, I think the vast majority of people, at least one parent or the other is struggling. I mean, I think it's unusual to see two totally stable, healthy, involved.
Yeah.
That's really not the norm in what we do. It's like, oh, wow, you're both stable, healthy parents. This is awesome. Let's do a 50-50. It's like those parents don't even usually need. Most of the time, that type of couple comes in and says, we want to mediate. We already know what we're doing with the parenting plan. Here's what we want to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They already know. I mean, I think you and your ex-wife were that way. It was like week on, week off. You both kind of already knew, what you wanted your involvement to be.
I knew I wanted week on, week off.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not
you
sure
suggested
she knew.
that to her. Yeah.
I did.
Yeah. Yeah. So this article, she kind of digs into two different pieces. One is where you have the child where they're trying to meet the parent's needs, and the child is caring for the parent,
mm-hmm.
and then the one where
that's not good.
Yeah, and the other side is the parent caring for the child. You have that aspect of it, but then you have the shifting back and forth between two households aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the two parts that she talks about in this, and the different impact that each of those things have. And one of the things she says is that, kids start to figure out which parent is going to put their emotional needs first. And they don't necessarily verbalize that
mm-hmm. because
they don't know to verbalize that, but they do feel it emotionally.
Right. They feel pressure to care for their parents.
To care for the one that is less capable.
Mm-hmm.
So, but she goes on to say, not all children in a split physical custody situation show signs of overt emotional distress. But those children, as she's worked with them, as they grow older and into adulthood, they do still describe feelings of being unsettled or feeling like things are disorganized or, the constant shifting kind of having this negative impact
mm-hmm.
on their stability.
Yeah.
This is the interesting part, though. She says, and I'm going to read this right out of the article because I don't want to misrepresent it, but she says, some professional literature indicates children fare better in a one-parent living arrangement with frequent visitation with the other parent. The difficulty for the courts and for parents is determining which parent is the parent caring for child scenario and not the child caring for parent scenario. This determination stymies both the court system as well as most parents. And this is what you and I go back to a lot, is the court has a very small window,
right,
a very short period of time to try to figure out what the best parenting plan is for the child. And even if they know this parent caring for child scenario versus child caring for parent scenario exists differently in each house, that there's one of those in each household, under the law, the problem becomes the law is still that frequent and continuing contact is the primary consideration if health, safety, and welfare are not in jeopardy.
That's true.
So it's kind of like, okay, that might be the most ideal situation, but that's not what we're here to determine. We're here to determine frequent and continuing contact. And I think this is a really frustrating aspect for a lot of parents.
Yeah, and I tend to, because I've seen a lot of literature that would seem to indicate that when both parents in a joint custody situation are doing the regular duties of parenthood, not just, going to surf or go to Disneyland or whatever that is, but, do you help with homework?
Right.
Do you read to your kids at night? Do you care? Do you cook meals? Do you,
right.
Being a parent's a lot of work.
I'm glad that part of it's over for me.
And there's a certain amount of selflessness that I think is good for kids. You can't be depending on them for your companionship.
Right.
You have to, and again, that's why I like alternating weeks, because the kids go away. They're gone for a whole week, and I do miss them, but they would not know that.
Right.
What I tell them is, look, you're going to mom's, woohoo!
Right. Right. Give them permission to go and have fun and enjoy that other parent because you don't want them sitting at the other parent's house worried about you.
Right. They don't because
Right.
I was hands off that world. I
Right.
didn't.
And
Yeah.
that was really hard for you because your kids were young
Yeah.
when we started this. And so not seeing them for a whole week was really tough. You used to get kind of down every transition to mom Friday.
That's true. It was.
Yeah.
I would get sad, and of course you miss your kids, but
Yeah.
it's not always about you.
That's right. Sometimes it's about them. So it's funny, but one of the things she says is in time, the more caregiving parent will often figure out the situation after observing the children go back and forth and observe the emotional and behavioral changes. But this parent has a difficult time convincing a court system that's dedicated to fairness, that the plan should be different. And so I think, to me, it's sort of like, okay, it would be best if we had a stable one-parent household with frequent visitation of the other parent, if the other parent is a situation where the child has to care for that parent. But given the difficulties that we see in the court, I think that what she's saying is the shifting back and forth is the second most detrimental thing, this frequent shifting back and forth. And so sometimes that first thing might not be in your control, but longer periods in each household might be. A lot of times that is something you can get the other parent to agree to.
Yeah.
We did that with your kids. We shifted the length of time up.
Well, I find that, and we teach this all the time, but my personal bias, and I think that Ms. Adams, or Dr. Adams, I guess I
Dr.
should call
Adams,
her.
yes.
Yeah, everybody has a bias, and not every situation is the same. You have situations that have extreme parentification. You've got, I can think of a number of cases that we're handling right now that have that feature.
Right.
And it's very difficult for the children in that situation, and the
Right.
children don't have any insight into what's going on.
Right.
So it's, again, maybe that's a tease to your ultimate point of getting them into therapy.
Right.
But it's really important to have boundaries so that when they come into your world, your role is their parent. So not only do you have fun with them, because parents have fun with their kids, but you
Right.
got to discipline them.
Right.
You got to teach them right from wrong.
Right.
You got to live a certain identity in front of them so that they can form themselves by watching you.
Right.
You need to be strong. You need to be a good person.
Right.
And then when they go, now it's time to take care of you. And you get to spend time with your adult friends. Do you have adult friends? Really important.
Right.
Church, non-home groups, like what do they call those? Organizations that are not government. There's a word for that.
I don't know what you're talking
like
about.
churches and clubs and all.
Just your community or whatever.
Yeah, your community. Now, get involved in that. Get involved with with other adults, and live a purpose-filled life without your kids. It's almost like being childless.
Right. Right. And so just to go on in the in this article, essentially what she says is that children do start to figure out that their emotional needs are being more met in one household than the other. And I think that we've witnessed that in our own situations and things. And one of the things that she says is that children will a lot of times end up starting to speak out and advocate for themselves as they get older.
Right.
But that children who have been in therapy are more likely to do that, to advocate for themselves and to put their feelings forth if they've been given the opportunity to process that emotionally and kind of figure out,
Well, I don't know. Again, I'm skeptical because you don't know exactly what's happening. It's a child that's expressing their opinion as to which parent they want to live with is in a loyalty bind, and you're not sure which one. It's impossible to tell which end of it you're on.
I agree with that, but I think her point is that if you're getting your child in therapy early on, that as they grow and develop and they're given the emotional tools, that they will have the ability to advocate for themselves. I don't think she's saying you take your child that wants to live with one parent into a therapist and let that therapist say, oh, yep, the child's valid. They should, what she's saying is if your child's 6, 7, 8, whatever, put your child in therapy now, because that's going to give them the tools and the insight they need to be able to advocate for themselves when they get old enough to do that, 13, 14, otherwise they tend to be.
Far be it from me to argue with you, but I think it's really important to tell your kids, even the older ones, what you're doing. Like, I don't want to go to mom's. Okay, I'm sorry you feel that way. So get in the car. We're taking you to mom's. In other words, I'm not involved in that decision. This is the parenting plan, and this is what we're going to do. So I'm the parent. So I exercise authority. That's the opposite of being parentified.
Right.
I'm exercising authority. I'm saying, this is what you're going to do, young man.
And I agree with that. And I think that should always be the parent's stance. But what I have found is that in extreme situations where the child is being parentified on a very, very extreme level, that there will hit a breaking point where the child kind of goes, this isn't normal.
Yeah.
This isn't right. And I shouldn't have to do this. And, I think it's important that they be able. I mean, I agree with you. It's a delicate balance because I always say you don't want the tail wagging the dog. Right. It's not up to the child to make the decision.
Right.
However, in this circumstance, if you have the child being parentified by one parent, it's really almost out of the hands of the other parent. It almost has to come from the child and or the children's therapist.
Yeah. Of course.
And I think that's
the therapists themselves might be biased.
They might. But the children's therapist is, to me, the linchpin of it. But let me read this paragraph because this kind of talks about it a little clearer. Sometimes children put their own foot down with parents and judges. They create their own design to live with their more caregiving parent or to reduce time with the other parent. This is common with teenagers, which is something I frequently say to people, who crave some settledness and control in order to have a social life with other teens because their perspective starts shifting off of you and onto their friends.
Yeah.
And she didn't say that. I'm saying that because that last sentence was me. So then the article goes on to say, in my experience, this happens more often with children in psychotherapy who explore themselves and get a clearer understanding of the effects of 50-50 shared custody and the emotional burden of psychologically trying to care for one parent. So what she's saying is this is a situation where it's a child that's, been dealing with caring for this parent emotionally for many, many years.
Yes.
And if they don't get any therapy to have their own insight about their own emotional needs and their own situation, then they're less likely to advocate for themselves if they need to.
Right. I understand.
And that
it empowers them.
It empowers them. And that's really what you want to do from the very start. And especially when I'm dealing in, the coaching situation, I work a lot with moms who are dealing with narcissistic exes. There's dads that are dealing with narcissistic exes too. I'm not saying that that's a mom specific thing. It's just I specifically have a coaching program for that. And I think what happens is, one of the things I say is like, if these behaviors are coming through in your ex, then you have to empower your child to be able to speak up for how they feel or what's going on. And I think a child can definitely respectfully say to a parent, when you say that to me, it hurts my feelings. Mm-hmm. But in my experience, a lot of these children are terrified to speak up. And I think it's particularly bad with little girls and dads. Little girls are very scared of their dads a lot of times. not all dads, I'm not saying, like, please don't. Sometimes people are like, all dads aren't like this. I know all dads aren't like this. Thomas is a fantastic dad. I'm a daughter. My dad's fantastic. I love him. He's the best dad in the whole world. But a lot of times the dynamic in these types of situations, if dad is the one that's more emotionally unstable, a lot of times the daughter is afraid to, stand up and say how she feels. And I think boys feel a lot of responsibility towards their moms when their mom is the one that's sort of less emotionally stable. I think boys tend to want to care for their mom and do become this parentified kind of, it's all in varying degrees, and there's all different perspectives of it. But I just found these other perspectives interesting, and I think it made for a good discussion.
Yes. Well, I don't necessarily agree with the author in every point.
Right.
I think parentification is a problem.
Yeah.
But that you have to be very careful.
Right.
That sometimes the problem is not parentification.
Right.
Or if the parent, I think that the best strategy, if you're going for a 50-50 custody, is to not give the impression that you're parentifying the child.
Right.
You really have to take a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
And in those situations, and I've heard you coaching some of these people on this, is that you have to let him take responsibility for his relationship to the child.
Or her.
Or her relationship to the
Right.
child.
You have to let the other parent, like, fall on their face if that's what you think they're going to do.
Right. And then eventually, you're right. Then if the child's empowered to speak up, they can voice their needs. And in California, older children can
Give their input.
Give their input as to their preference as to which I don't necessarily think is such a good law.
Yeah.
But we live with it.
Right.
But if you're going into court, you cannot. This isn't fair is not a good argument.
Right. Right. Well, and she even says in the article, like, the court is ill-equipped to deal with a lot of these situations.
Right.
But the thing that was really a big takeaway for me is the back and forth.
Yeah.
Because the back and forth is something that you can a lot of times control how much of that is happening.
Right.
And like I said, with your kids, we went from, every other weekend and a weekday overnight to week on, week off, to 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, to 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off. So we've gotten longer and longer because we've listened to the children and their preferences, and we've been able to negotiate that.
That's a good point.
Yeah, between the households. And so I think, any child is going to do better with longer stretches. Now, is it odd when Thomas's kids leave and they're gone for 3 weeks? A little bit. It's a little bit almost like we do have kids in the house, don't we? Like, it can be a little odd. But so the parentification issue, again, she points out that it's not something the court is well equipped to handle. The child needs to be in therapy if you think that's what's going on, or you think the other parent is less emotionally stable. The solution is always put them in therapy so that they can learn how to process that and be able to advocate for themselves when the time's appropriate. But the secondary piece of the tumultuous back and forth, I think, is something that we see parents do a lot because of their own feelings,
because of their own insecurity.
Yeah, and that's something you can control, and that's something you can give your child in the midst of all this.
And again, I think that it's the same. The prescription is the same as all the other issues in divorce, which is, get a life.
Right.
Get your own life.
Right.
I mean,
focus on you.
Yeah.
The key is you.
And have healthy relationships with other adults.
Right.
That child cannot fulfill that. That child is not your peer.
Right.
I tell my kids that all the time. You're not my peer. You're not allowed to talk to me like that.
Right.
And I think a lot of parents are afraid to say that to their kids.
Yeah.
It's like, you do what I say.
Right.
Because I'm in authority over you.
Right. And you still have to be that authority even in divorce. I mean, how many times have we sat in a courtroom and heard a judge say to the parent, you need to be the parent?
Be the parent.
Yeah, they do it. Thomas is right. They do expect you to exercise authority and reinforce the parenting plan, and this is what we're doing. And and do the rules and all that. But I think if you have concerns, the buzzword of the day is get them in therapy, because ultimately that's the only potential solution to the problem.
Right. And there are therapists and therapists. I find that, literally 70% of them don't know what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, and children's therapists are.
I mean, I hate to say that, I'm going to offend the therapists out there. But if you're listening, you're one of the 30%. Right?
Well, and if we refer to you, you're definitely one of the 30%. But the children's therapist in particular, I find, are hard to find. I think especially since the pandemic,
right.
Every parent I talk to is having a hard time finding someone that does child therapy, that has availability. And then the third concern becomes, is this person good at what they do? Because in some ways, beggars can't be choosers.
Right. But some children will, or some therapists will support the unhealthy family dynamics.
Right.
Like the unholy connection between one parent.
Right.
And the children.
Right.
And some won't see what's going on. And
right.
I think you have to be careful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a nuanced problem for sure. So if you have an unstable ex, you have somebody that you have, that you feel like has some mental instability or mental diagnoses or struggles, or you have somebody that's just high conflict that you have a hard time dealing with, the solution is a long-term solution, and get them
into therapy.
Yeah,
I was trying to say it at the same time.
You're trying to
ready? On three. 1, 2, 3. Get them into therapy.
Just like that. Yeah. But the second best thing you can do is try to reduce the number of transitions. So even if you have a 2-2-3, if you can go to a 2-2-5-5, if you can grit your teeth and bear a week on, week off. I find if your children are school age or older, they'll adapt really easily to a week on, week off. It's actually usually the parents that have the harder time. So,
yes, I agree.
Yeah. Okay, if you are watching us on YouTube, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so that you see more videos as they're released. If you're listening to the podcast and you want to see what we look like, you can go over to YouTube and look at the YouTube videos. If you
can bear
it. And if you're listening to the podcast, don't forget to rate and review us and to subscribe so that you get notified as new episodes are released each week. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Divorce University online podcast with your hosts, Thomas and Tammy Ferreira. For more information, visit www.divorceuniversityonline.com.